First, let's go through the goals. We're going to do quick introductions, very quick. We're going to do a general overview of our Pathways intervention. We're going to have some sites talk about the staffing structure for intervention sites that have multiple navigators. We're going to go review the screening and enrollment process, review the core components of the intervention, talk about graduation criteria, hopefully have some time for questions, and then talk about next steps. So I'm going to introduce our speakers for today on the next slide. We have Amy Coy from Shiloh House, supervisor for the Northeast region in Arapahoe-Douglas County. We have Heather Powell from Denver County, Kippy Clausen, who's our RIDE partner, who's been with us since phase 1. Christy Townsend's our Boulder County navigator. Mark Ware's Denver County navigator. Nicole Kuzma is our Boulder County supervisor. And finally, let's see here, my chat's in the way here. Did I get everyone? Yeah. And Will is from the Northeast region as well at Shiloh House as a navigator. Great, okay. Project management team, I think we all know each other, but again, Lene Davis, we've got 2 staffers from CPR, Savannah Matiash, who's our PMIS coordinator, that's our database, and then Hillary Thibodeau is our technical assistance provider at CPR. We have Trevor Williams from CDHS, who's the project director for Pathways. Jeff Romero, you all know him, he's our training lead and the deliverer of the Coach-like engagement intervention training. Then we have Denise, who's the project manager, and Derek Blake, Chafee administrator at CDHS. Next slide. All right. Kippy, I'm going to turn it over to you to jump right on in with an overview of Pathways and our navigators.
Great. So Christy and Will are going to help me with this. And so I'm really happy to be a part of this. So I think folks remember or have heard that when we started this, actually, we had a blended group. It was runaway and homeless youth providers. So Urban Peak and Together had a site, and then the Rural Collaborative was a site. And then we had our county departments with Boulder and Denver County. And when we started this intervention at the very beginning, so Christy, I've been on the longest, then Christy joined, and then Will, we actually were looking at the Pathways model. And so at the center, you'll see that it really is all about coach-like engagement, and that young people are working alongside youth as coaches in a coaching way. You'll see the light blue, which is all these tools and resources we utilized. And in the beginning, we went through what you're about to see many times, but there's a whole bunch of tools and strategies that we brought together to really look like what are those tools that our navigators would use. And the outside ring really says that these are the main areas we are all working on. And what's really important here is you'll all hear about an MOU with a RIDE partner. It's important to realize and know that these are no different than what your runaway and homeless youth providers are working on, right? So we found that there was a common group of outcomes areas that we all were working on together, which is housing, education, permanency, employment, health, and well-being. And so this is kind of our starting point that really got us talking about this intervention. And I'm going to ask Christy and Will, do you guys have anything to add about this first wheel that we looked at?
I think so, Kippy.
Great. So we can go to the next slide. So our flow chart. So let's just say that if you asked all of us what we did for the first 2 years of this grant, it was this flow chart. And what was super important in doing this and working together on this is what we started to really understand is that it was important to come up with a process that was clear and understandable that we were all doing. The second thing, which we really started with in the beginning, was there was a intervention flow chart that was one for the Rural Collaborative and Urban Peak and the Place. And then the next thing is there was one for Human Services. And then we had lovely Christy, who was kind of the person who was doing both. She was a single navigator that was working both at Attention Homes, or known now as Together, and also with the department. And we actually got to the point that we were actually doing the exact same activities. And so this really became our flow chart. And it's really broken into three main areas, which I think are important to know. There's the engagement area. And I think we as a group knew that this ended up taking anywhere from 3 to 6 months, sometimes a year, depending on where our young people were. And then we have the active phase, and this is the phase where we're really looking at all the interventions. And this is really where navigation and what our Pathways navigators, where they live and breathe. And then there is this place which are going to really look like hear about this graduation criteria. And I don't know, our navigators will say more, but there was this place that we were, that after the active phase, we were still in contact with them. We were still checking in. And then we were also really clear about what would happen and how we would re-engage. And so this is really kind of what I would say, print this thing out, put it up on your wall. This is how work gets done by navigators. And then maybe real quickly, I don't know, Christy and Will, do you want to jump in and maybe let's talk about the engagement strategy a little bit and what was kind of the key things that you're doing during engagement as a navigator?
I'll jump in. I'm Christy Townsend, like people have heard, from Boulder County. And this flow chart, it has had a lot of different variations, I think, as Kippy has said. And we've really come to land on this version. For me, I'm just going to kind of talk about the engagement phase. I think, like Kippy said, it can take a little while. This is where we get the referral and we are outreaching to caseworkers or a shelter staff worker. And this is the time where we're trying to get the youth excited to work with us, excited about the program, excited about their goals. It's kind of that time period that we get to have with them. That's, to me, this is kind of a really fun phase, like before we actually really get into what are your goals? How do we meet your goals? This is the time where I get to kind of enjoy being with the youth. I take a lot of our youth out for a coffee at Starbucks for the first engagement. And that's with our flex funds, which we'll kind of talk about later. So that's been really helpful to engage youth in the beginning. So I think that's kind of what I have to say. Will, do you want to add?
Yeah. I found out that, like Christy said, taking them out for coffee or some sort of food really helps them open up and engage more with you. And it just makes it more comfortable for them. It's a comfortable setting, and it's just makes it easier for the whole process to start. And it's really that starting of the relationship building phase too. So it's just about getting to know each other and, where we can start with the goals and first steps.
And I would add that you kind of have to have a really good engagement phase for you to be able to move into the next phase to work on all those goals, because you need to, like as Will said, have that relationship built with them so that they feel comfortable and trust you to be able to work with their goals and what they want to accomplish. And I think also during this phase, it's really important to start talking to youth about that path. We do have a graduation and that there is going to be an end date. And, sometimes I kind of talk about, depending on your goals, depending on how long that's going to take, is going to be how long the program is, but there is an end date. And I think that's important even during the engagement phase to make note of.
And as you look at this, that's why Pathways this is one place where it looks a little bit different than I think Common Work. And this is one of the niches that we really talked about, the difference between runaway and homeless youth providers and also county departments. When a young person shows up on our door and says, hey, I'm homeless, we get busy that moment. And as a group, we really started to discuss the importance of really getting involved with the young person as quick as possible, especially when we're looking at these young people who are at risk of homeless or may be homeless. And so that's really why we call Pathways. I always talk about it. It's a direct referral process. The name comes in and that navigator knows who that youth is, and they're immediately out there trying to reach them and find them. And this is that place where in the very beginning in this, what we would say in this engagement phase, this is really where the screening is happening. the assessment and readiness. There's contact with the referral person. You're really kind of getting all the information in. And in those conversations, those are happening. And you're also then at that point figuring out, are they eligible? We don't start with, are you eligible? We do the relationship building in the beginning and ongoing as we're kind of getting to this eligibility phase. And that is really critical because, you know, young people really want to know what the options are, but when they want to talk to a navigator, you know, the navigator's still there checking in with them. And at that place, as soon as you finish that, that's when you do the baseline survey, and then, you know, we start our process. So there's a lot of happening with those, what we call the coffee talks, or, you know, Will is a mobile one because he, 6 counties, Will, is that correct? So you're in 6 counties that Will goes. And I mean, a lot of this is done in his car. He's meeting young people where they're at. So that's also why I think the caseload is so small, is because you may have 6 or 7 young people you're working on engagement and one that's enrolled, but those engagement youth are treated just as importantly as those that are actually in the active phase. So then we get to the active phase, and I'll just kind of talk about the logistics. You know, the first flow shot you saw is basically coach-like engagement was one of many tools. And, you know, as we did this work, and learn more, it was really actually the coach-like engagement intervention that I think you've all been tried and the way of working with young people, which is really the model intervention. And what it does is it uses a bunch of different tactics. So you can see that, you know, there's weekly contact, and then there's coordination with the youth team. There's strength and barriers. We're looking at, their goals that they're working on. You're also looking at how to handle crisis situations. In that, there's also some things that I think are already in your practice. And so, you know, I've often heard people say, oh, this feels like, and we heard this a lot when we were starting, this feels like this is what we're already doing. And some of these things you may have already been doing. However, you're now using this coach-like engagement intervention strategy is how the work gets done. And so it may be that you're filling out the youth connector scale. There's some work with flex funds going on here, some future self work about what you want in the future. There's looking at, you know, as a young person in a permanency roundtable. Some of these young people are involved with high fidelity wraparound teams in your community. There's a bunch of different pieces and tools that a navigator basically knows how to do and pulls out to really work with the young person on co-creating this plan. And I think Will started as a RIE provider and then moved into a Chafee worker. And so maybe Christy and Will, you can kind of start talking about what that actual active phase looks like and what you know about that. And I think we average, Lene, about a year and a half, between 6 months to a year and a half during this phase.
We learned a lot in phase 2, and we anticipate that, you know, the engagement phase will take as long as the youth, until the youth is ready to engage with you. So you have that relationship that you're starting to build with them, but until they're ready to come in to the active phase, it really varies depending upon where the youth's at. But the active phase itself, we've learned that we anticipate it being about 9 to 11 months. Could be, you know, some youth it will be longer, some youth it will be much less. But, from kind of enrollment to graduation, the average is going to be about between 9 and 11 months, probably 11 months is what we found in phase 2. You want to go to the next slide, Denise?
So I think I'll kind of jump into this part. This is kind of the typical youth engagement that we have with Pathways. We have the weekly in-person meetings with their navigator, and I think this is super important because we are meeting, pretty intensively with them for a duration of time. So, I mean, I think some of my youth, not only am I seeing weekly, but we talk to several times during the week as well. Youth are empowered to set and achieve their own goals from day one. It's all about what they want, what their goals are, and I don't care, what anyone else's kind of pressures are putting on. This is really a youth-driven approach. And I think to have their goals is, the only way that they'll achieve them is if it's obviously theirs. The youth self-advocated for services they need, which again, this can be challenging, but I think as long as you let them know what resources or services are out there and let them choose, that's kind of what that refers to. The utilization of the flex funds. I think we do have slides that is going to go into this later into a little bit more detail, but this has been huge, I think, to be able to just have a purchase card on me to be able to purchase what I need to for my youth at that moment has been very valuable. We are taking advantage of outside referrals and also secure, safe, and stable housing is one of the main components, and achieve goals to graduate from the Pathways program. Next slide. Do you want to talk about this a little bit, Will? And I can.
Yeah, I can jump in. So the whole process is about establishing their goals. They have to have that direct support. That's where the face-to-face every week comes in, and having that flexibility to be able to get them food or clothes wherever they may need. I've even done gas cards sometimes if they needed it. And then making sure that part of this whole thing is making sure that we can have contact with them. If they don't have a way for us to contact them on a daily basis or weekly, then it's not going to work out. So part of that is having a phone provided, which I've done for quite a few of my youth, and sometimes even paid the bills on those phones for a few months even. But then, you got that direct support, and then skill building is, making sure they have those life skills and the advocacy for themselves so they can do it essentially when they graduate by themselves, so they don't have to ask for help anymore. And making sure they know how to be a good tenant in their apartments, how, they know how to make a budget on their own if they get a new job or things change, and then fill out applications for jobs, things like that. And then obviously, like Christy said, they set their own goals. It's completely up to them what they want to do. If they want to get a car, that's one of their big goals. We start working towards that. Or housing is obviously a huge goal when you first initially meet with the youth. So just making sure that those goals stay on track too is part of the coach-like engagement as well.
Yeah, I would agree. Do we want to do the next slide? So yeah, this is some time for some questions. I don't think we've had any in the chat so far.
And did Mark want to add from Denver County? He's a newer navigator, and I think Mark was going to share some engagement strategies. Do we have Mark?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm showing up as Hillary, and I don't know how to change it. So
just right or left click if you click on your name.
Yeah, just what Christy and Will was saying, and especially when it comes to setting goals, I think, our youth have been involved in the foster care system, a lot of them for a good portion of their life. And so they've always had these caseworkers that have come in and they've kind of told them what they're going to do. And then we come in as Pathways navigators and it's completely different, right? They find out that they're setting their own goals. And I think that really, really gets them engaged. And then, some of the goals may seem large to them, and our job is to help them break it down in more manageable steps. And that's what we do in Denver County. So if their goal is, employment, then we'll break it down in smaller steps. Like, do you have a resume? Let's work on application skills, interviewing skills. How do you do a job search? How do you make sure that you get to the job if you're taking public transportation? So, I think letting them set their own goals, which is what Pathways is all about, really, really keeps them engaged. But we do have those youth that could always be more engaged, right? So I'm still learning that portion of it, and hoping to get better at keeping the youth engaged in the future.
Can I add about the flow chart. I also think that's been super helpful as a navigator to be able to kind of identify where my youth is on the flow chart. It's been really helpful during supervision with my supervisor, because we're able to, be able to say where this particular youth is in our flow chart. And it's been helpful to see maybe they really do need graduation, and we've been kind of keeping them on for a while, but really they're in the graduation phase, and let's talk about that more. So I think that's been helpful.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add as a ride provider who's been part of this is, the flow chart really, I think, helps all of us look at how it isn't business as usual. And I think that was the thing, is that, there might be some tools and techniques that you're still using. Your young person may be still be participating in a permanency roundtable. You may still be doing the connector scale, which you might currently have been doing as a Chafee worker or a runaway and homeless youth provider. But really it is that coach-like engagement, and then the regular meetings and all the things that the navigators have talked about. And I think that was really at the end, when we kind of came to this single flow chart, is this real clear understanding is that it is how you provide the support you're giving to that young person, being very youth driven and helping them build skills, and kind of what this slide is saying right here is really getting them to where they're at. But it is using that coach-like engagement. And so again, having that up and realizing that it's not as much as important as what tool you're using during that time, it's how you're working as a navigator. And I think that was why we kept going over this over and over and over again, is to help really get clear that it is how we're delivering the services. So questions for anybody on this? So, and if there aren't questions, I'm going to tell you a couple general lessons learned that might help you get thinking, right? So referrals look very different, right? A young person when they come in and say, hey, I'm interested, that really is when the navigator is starting to get connected with that young person. So think about in your organization with that flow chart is, what and how are you set up to make sure that there is a really quick response? We've learned that if a young person, is referred and then it's, we don't talk to them for a while, it really is a very different youth engagement. That's business is old. This is business is new, is the minute we hear from them. So I would think about that. The second thing I would have people think about is, if you go back, and Lene, can you go back to the full flow chart for a second? Back a couple screens. So when you think at that green section, all of your interventions, and this would be some questions of like preparing, like, what do you want to do to get ready for this? It might be really great with your team. And I think Will and Christy and Mark, who've kind of been doing it for a while, reach out to those who've done it, is really, what does coach-like engagement look like when maybe you're creating the connection scale, or when you're talking about permanency goals, or when they're coming up with their goals. And maybe Mark and Christine Will, can you talk a little bit about how goal formation seems different using coach-like engagement in that active phase? And I think it's those micro goals that kind of keep growing out of a big goal. Can anybody share what that was like?
Yeah, so, like Mark was saying, some of the goals seem too big for them to comprehend at first. And that's where you go to break it down into the micro goals. Like, okay, what is this baby step we can do to get you into a job? Do you know how to build a resume? Do you have one? Let's start there first. Do you have any experience in these things? Probably something you were doing recently, or some portion of your life. It makes it seem like it's not so big anymore if you had those small steps.
And I think, to add to that, I think a big part of during the engagement phase is getting to know the youth, using the coaching skills that we've learned, powerful questions, really just creating that relationship with that person, that young person, to be able to talk to them about those goals. I think kind of Will was just saying how he does that. But I want to kind of emphasize that I think a good part of it does happen in the relationship building, to be able to create some goals that the youth can accomplish.
One thing I'll add that we learned from our focus groups with youth participants in phase 2 is that, we have some wonderful quotes, and you can go to CPR's website. We'll share that link in the chat. We have a Pathways to Success page that has all our resources on there. But, we had some great quotes from youth. We heard from them, and they really talked about the relationship that they formed with their navigator, and how the navigator walked alongside of them, as opposed to being another professional in their life that said, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And it's really, that was kind of key in building that relationship and building that trust, so those youth, to get them to the point of achieving those goals. And so I'd encourage you, if you haven't already, to review some of the research briefs on our website, so you can hear directly from the youth on what they were saying.
So
Melissa has a question. Sorry, did somebody?
So maybe answer Melissa's through about meeting weekly, but what do you do in those weekly meetings? Because I don't know, I think the young people, at least I've talked to, love the weekly meetings. So Will, so the question says, what if the youth doesn't want to meet weekly? What's been your guys' experience with weekly meetings?
So far, I haven't found that to be the case, especially if you build that great rapport and that great relationship right off the bat. And obviously it's going to take time to build the full relationship, right? It's never going to stop building. But once you get that rapport and they're engaged, they always want to meet. And it's like, okay, yeah, we're making progress on my goal. Let's do this. We got to keep meeting. I've even had youth reach out to me over the weekend, like, hey, I know we set up this meeting, but can we move it up earlier? I really want to get this going, or things like that. It's been a beautiful thing to see. I have yet to see that youth doesn't want to meet weekly, though. But if that does happen, that's where that coaching comes into.
I do have some youth that maybe not want to meet weekly isn't the right word, because they're busy, right? They're going to school, they're working a full-time job, and they have a life too. They don't just constantly want to see my face all the time. But I think the way around that is still making sure that we're engaging them, that we're checking in, if that's by text or if that's by a phone call or an email, just shooting a quick email, making sure that everything's okay, and what's the progress on the goals that we're working on. So I think there are still ways to stay engaged, even if you can't meet them face to face every single week.
I think just to reiterate, that what Mark stated is that it's a weekly touch base. So it's not, and certainly with COVID, these meetings have been happening over Zoom, or some video conferencing platform, or even on the phone. There's flexibility in what that meeting looks like. Not every meeting is a sit down face to face at Starbucks for 1 hour. It's really about what the youth needs at that point, and touching base with them and reminding them about their goals and working through the process. Christy, did you have something you wanted to jump in?
No, I was really just kind of agreeing with what you were saying. Sorry. But I would agree with Will and Mark that I really haven't had an issue with them not wanting to meet weekly. It's been more, I think, of what Mark kind of mentioned, is having both of our schedules aligned so that we can all meet that week. But sometimes it's just, like you were saying, a quick text and, hey, how are you? How's your week going? Is there anything that you need going on? Can we schedule for next week? So I don't think every week, like you're saying, has to be the face-to-face. And some weeks, man, I mean, I could be you know, at the DMV with a kid for 2.5 hours. And then maybe the next week is just a check-in. So I think it can be flexible.
Hi, everyone. This is Hillary from CPR. Just wanted to jump in and let you know we'll have another opportunity for questions towards the end. And just feel free to pop questions into the chat as we kind of dive deeper into the presentation and talk more about the intervention. And if we don't get to address every question at the end through question and answer, we will compile all the questions and answer them in written form and distribute that to you all. So feel free to ask away.
Now we're going to turn it over, shifting gears a little bit and talking. Heather at Denver County is going to talk a little bit about the staffing structure in a county where we have multiple Chafee workers / navigators. Heather, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. So in Denver County, we currently have 5 Chafee workers, and previously we just had one person doing pathways. This time around, we will have 2 designated pathways workers. And so kind of the flow of how I have it set up in Denver County is everybody that is referred for Chafee gets a pathway screen, and then depending on how they score on that, then they will staff it with me, and then we will make a decision if they would go into pathways or not. Currently, Mark is handling all our pathways youth right now, but that's kind of how we do it. All of the workers have been, of course, trained and engaged in a coach-like way. And so they all have the skills, they all know the tools and the assessments. We have kind of combined what the intake process looks like, you know, just so we're using similar forms and some, but there are, you know, distinct differences of a few more assessments that happen for pathways versus, you know, Chafee services. Certainly, you know, with Chafee, when our kids need more, we give them more, but certainly checking in if there is space, is it more appropriate for them to be on a pathways path where they need continuous intensive services and support. So we kind of staff those regularly, but that's kind of what it looks like in Denver County.
Thanks, Heather. Nicole, are you on with us? Do you want to talk a little bit about the staffing structure in Boulder County?
Yeah, I am here at the moment. And listening to Heather, we are very similar currently. However, our growth over the years has been that we had separate staffing. So we had Christy as our original and sole navigator. And then we had Chafee workers providing a Chafee service, and it was very siloed. And at this point, we have everyone that is in Boulder County providing independent living work is trained in the coach-like engagement model and able to do the pathways navigation with youth. So we are shifting here in Boulder so that we don't have wait lists for pathways referrals. And so the only difference that I think I heard was for Denver, the screen comes in and everyone will receive the pathways intake screening tool. And for Boulder, when someone is directed to the pathways route, then we reach out to the caseworker or the referring party and we fill out the screen at that time and continue to move forward with navigation.
Amy, did you want to share Arapahoe Douglas, and also then you have Will up in the Northeast region as well? You want to talk about that staffing structure?
Yeah, so we run pretty similar. However, there are times where will obtain a referral or a interest, if you will, for lack of better terms, up in the Northeast region, more in the rural area. And so sometimes he'll go out and meet with people and then send in. So we kind of get referrals both ways from referring parties or from Youth Direct. And for the most part, everything else runs pretty the same. I think the additional change for us is that beyond Shiloh House we don't just run Chafee or Pathways, and so we have a lot of others. So if there's anybody out there who is not working for the county, or maybe they are and running multiple programs, we're running one big program with lots of different interventions under it. And so so I could talk more specifically about that at a later time, not to bore everybody with that, how that runs, but feel free to reach out to me. But yeah, so we have a larger program within these interventions, but the majority of the staff, I think I have one that still needs to get into the coach-like engagement. So of course, they are all still offering the coach-like engagement, just not with the intervention, if you will.
And I think, you know, for the smaller counties that have just one supervisor, one navigator, you know, Chafee worker, the idea, I guess, is to just keep in mind that, you know, we're providing this intervention, everyone's been trained in coach-like engagement. There is a study going on. We have our screening tool. There will be some youth who don't screen into the study. You're still providing those types of services in a coach-like way to all of the youth that you're serving in your sites. And that goes for, you know, larger and smaller counties, for all counties. And, but the navigators themselves, for those youth that have that risk factor of one or more on our screening tool, which we'll talk about here in just a few minutes, you know, those youth will be enrolled in the study. There's always, you know, the study obviously is why we're doing all of this. But those youth who have an increased risk of homelessness are going to receive this Pathways services. They're going to receive the coach-like engagement, that you know, that relationship building piece, and then, you know, the components that we've gone through here. So we're not dictating what counties, how you structure your staff. I think this was a good example of what our counties have determined that's best for them. And, you know, if you have additional questions, I just want to offer for each of the sites, if you want to set up a call with the evaluation team, you know, you can directly email me or Denise, and we will schedule a one-on-one call, and we can talk through what different scenarios, what will work best for your county, if you don't have kind of a clear vision for how this is going to work. I mean, I know we're starting something new here, and the evaluation is, you know, critical, and you know, we're going to be working through what the enrollment process looks like. So there'll certainly be questions and technical assistance around that. But just getting you started, I think, you know, we want to make sure that you're comfortable in what your staffing structure looks like. And so if you do have questions and want to schedule a one-on-one, and we can kind of talk through that individually with each of the sites, you know, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to schedule that. Is there any other questions, comments, or does anyone else want to share anything around staffing and staffing structure? All right. So Denise, let's go to the next slide. So now let's talk a little bit about how we are determining eligibility for our target population. And I believe, Kippy, do you want to start us off here with our screening tool?
Yeah, so our screening tool is a wonderful tool that is a great way to really understand risk. And I want to talk a little bit about where this came from. It was a great partnership with runaway and homeless youth providers and county departments. And then Lene's team at CPR, they basically went out and looked. And so this actually is based off of a thing called the TADE triage screen. And it really looks at young people who are at risk of homelessness. And then what we did is added some very specific Colorado-owned questions. The screening tool was reviewed and informed and put it in front of young adults, and they gave their feedback on it. And so it's a really great tool to do this work. And you complete it in PMIS. And I think each site can talk a little bit more about it. I'm going to talk from a Balance Estate. So anybody who is in the Balance Estate of Colorado through the COC, this is the identical tool that is being used by the Rural Collaborative and also being used as the diversion process within our coordinated entry system. And the beauty about this is that we're all looking at the same data. Some of the most important partners you're going to get will be your runaway and homeless youth providers. And that's kind of where I still sit on this committee, and also your housing partners, because really for young people, they may end up in the adult homeless system or at a runaway and homeless youth provider, but they really are a young person that is eligible and is better suited, should be in the intervention with Pathways. They are Chafee eligible youth. And so this tool is a consistent tool. And there are a couple questions in here that I always get asked about. You know, have you ever engaged in sexual act for something of value, such as money, food, housing, and gifts and favors? Just know that that is a human trafficking, a validated question. And we don't have young people that worry about it. I mean, it is just the question to ask. So I just want to say, get very comfortable with that tool, but it is self-report. And it looks like, you know, the thing I would say is one makes them eligible. We're finding with the Rural Collaborative, our numbers are about 3 to probably 2.5 to 4 is what our numbers are running. And Lene, remind me, what are the average that we're running for this right now that we've learned over the intervention?
Yeah, so our average enrolled youth in Pathways had 5 risk factors, like 4.8. So, you know, we have some youth who have 0. It's very few, less than, I would say, 8% of the youth that we screened in phase 2 did not have a risk factor. And so, you know, we didn't enroll them in this study and did not provide Pathways specific services to them. So, you know, 90% of the youth that you screen are going to answer yes to one or more of these questions and are going to screen in. And as Kippy mentioned, you know, we developed this based on evidence-based or evidence-informed tools for identifying youth at risk of homelessness in the literature, and adapted, you know, most of these are the triage tool questions. And then we've added screening from a question from the Vera Institute from Human Trafficking to get at the trafficking question. About 15% of our youth had reported yes to being trafficked, labor or sex trafficked. And that was before they'd even developed a relationship with their navigator. So this screening tool, I want you all to, you have a hard copy of it. We sent it as an attachment. It's built into the system that you'll be trained on. You know, it's just yes or no, and it will automatically enroll them in the study. But we want you all to be comfortable with administering the screening tool. Some sites, the supervisors will, you know, receive the hard copy referrals from a RIE provider. I guess I want you all to be thinking through, how are we going to identify, you know, cast the widest net possible and identify the most number of youth who are Chafee eligible in our communities that we can administer this screening tool to. And then for those who answer yes to one or more of these questions, they'll be enrolled in this study. And I don't know if Will, you want to talk, because Will's mobile, you know, he's up in the Northeast region. He serves a lot of rural counties. And so it looks very different for him than it does, for example, in Denver County. So Will, do you want to talk about how the screening tools are administered, or who does that, or give the new sites an idea of who they should send out these screenings to? And then I want you all to think through the process of who is going to be the point person at our site to identify, receive those screening. Maybe it is the navigator, and then the navigator is going to enter it in, reach out to the youth and enroll them. So there's some process here that we're not going to tell you this is how you have to do it. We want you to think through what the requirements of that process are, and then figure out how you can internally make that work at your site that's best for you. And again, there will be technical assistance provided to help support you in that process. And we might not get it right at first, and we're able to go ahead and adjust that as we go along. But the identification process and kind of casting the widest net for identifying eligible youth is critical to the success of testing this intervention with youth in this and enrolling them in this study. So I've been talking a lot, and I'll shut up. Will, do you want to talk a little bit about your process?
Sure. So because I do work in the rural communities, cities are few and far between each person, right? So typically the referring party, I can send them this and ask them if they would like to do it. If they don't feel comfortable doing it with the youth, I typically do that myself with them, just going through getting them, identifying them and whatnot. And they, there's some hard questions on here that some youth are uncomfortable with, and just let them know right off the bat that if you don't feel like answering this, that's okay. We can just hang out, and maybe it'll divulge itself later when they do feel comfortable with you and able to bring that out. But typically I do it with the youth, unless the caseworker or referring party feels comfortable doing it. And sometimes after you get the referral, it's hard to find them too. So I've been running around Fort Morgan one time for about a month trying to look for this youth in his car, and was never able to find him.
And I'll let Lene answer Mary's question in a second, but I think that's really what I would say is to cast the net wide. So we use this in the Rural Collaborative, and we worked really hard with our COC. So if people don't know what a COC is, you're going to learn about that. But actually, this is the tool that is shared with all our COC sites. We did a training with all of the adult housing providers. The reality is for young people, and if we look at what Chafee eligibility looks like right now, is the goal is not to go to the usual suspects or the ones that are already, where they are. The really goal is to help find and really look for those young people who we're really trying to bring back in to really reduce, because that's the goal of this grant, right? Reduce the likeliness of homelessness after foster care. So with this tool, my suggestion is, and some ideas, so we have actually McKinney-Vento liaisons that are trained in rural Colorado that can do this tool. So any of the counties that are out there or partners of it, I know Carlton, you're on, this is the same assessment you do for the Rural Collaborative, but we have McKinney-Vento liaisons that are trained to do this. We have some mental health centers that are trained to do it. So for you, Katrina, Health Solutions and the YWCA is doing this. So we have a lot of unique partners. For Will, the collaborative management team, so some collaborative management programs are doing this tool. And so as you start looking at that, I would say is to get really creative about who is that referral and recruitment process. And it's beyond the department, right? Because right now we know where those young people are. We're really looking for where others are. And so when you start looking at those partnerships, and as you start building your network, I really encourage you to think of who are the people that these young people may have, maybe getting supports from now, and how do you find those people and set up a plan for that. And I think Amy and Nicole and Heather, you guys might also be able to say kind of what you've learned about how to make sure you're casting the net wide for referrals beyond the Department of Human Services. So Heather or Amy or Nicole, do you want to add what you've done to really increase your recruitment and casting wide?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I think it's collaborations with our ride providers and just our other community providers. And so I think that is helpful throughout the project in getting a wider spectrum of who the youth are, but just putting it out there in all of those spaces. And also, like, I would like to use more than what we have. We have Facebook that's approved now, but also utilizing like social media networks. I'm still lobbying to get what actual kids use, which is not Facebook, but it's something. So that's what we do in Denver.
We work really closely with the Attention Homes together in Boulder, as well as running reports through Trails, and then we outreach to the folks that are on the reports, either to our internal caseworker, directly with youth. We also do kind of marketing and outreach with schools, as well as our probation department in Boulder. So we really try to let people know, and we often get emails from another community partner and they just ask what type of service, and then we send a referral and they send it back. And so that's a big part of how we make sure that we're not just getting a small sampling of possible candidates for the program.
Yeah, I think that's really just about being like open to anybody who needs support, and that they come in so many different ways. So even significant others or friends who are hanging out with the young people. Of course, we partner with the schools as well, like our alternative schools. And we have partnered with McKinney-Vento in different areas as well. And so we are kind of our own ride partnership. We work with the Rural Collaborative as well. And so we do, of course, support with that. But it's just about really, I think for us, about being open-minded, that if a young person surfaces in whichever capacity and needs support and is struggling, we have the conversation and we outreach to them. And whether it's us providing the service or linking them into a service that they could receive, then we know we're helping that young person. So it goes beyond just checking all the boxes, but really making sure our young people are being supported. And we run the Trails reports and things like that as well, but just trying to say something different and think out of the box a little bit.
And the Trails reports are also important because that will be a primary source of how you identify youth to serve in Pathways. And Heather, do you want to talk a little bit about the report and how you identify youth internally as they age into Chafee services and become eligible for Pathways, or may become eligible for Pathways?
I mean, previously, we actually used our permanency roundtable list is what we had a list of kids that have been in out-of-home care for over 12 months. And so currently, I don't think, I mean, we still have a long list of kids or whatever from that pool of people. And so I don't know if you want to ask Nicole or Amy, because I know before I was having a hard time getting the report that you're referring to in Denver County. So.
Yes, Amy, do you want to share and then Nicole?
Yeah, the report, we use the out-of-home placement report, and I was supposed to look up the name of that, wasn't I? And so, and then we look, then I have to do my own kind of digging in there. Going to be working with IT to maybe come up with their own really specific report to this intervention specifically here soon.
And I will add, as Nicole's getting ready to talk about it, it's like, it's great you guys all have reports. I was, from the RIE perspective, all of us, when we did this intervention, I will tell you what we did the very first 3 to 6 months of this intervention. We actually had to come up with a referral process. So we all had to create these really intricate spreadsheets. And, and I can talk about the initial one that Will and I were working on at that time. We went to the best practice court team. We met with collaborative management. In the northern communities, we met with the United Ways. We went to the mental health center. We went to school districts. We talked to their McKinney-Vento liaisons. And we came up with this very detailed process of really identifying where these referrals would come from. And being part of a multi-site intervention, what I can tell you is each community has vast collaborations, even our small teeny ones. And what it was really super important for us to sit down and talk with all of them and really get a clear idea about where these young people might be and how can we get to them. Because really from this is we were really looking at how do we make sure we're getting the young people. And at that point, we were looking with the highest risk. And we were going to places to find them that weren't traditional. So I would encourage you, if you're not quite sure about what your referral process looks like, I'm happy to share ours that we created for Weld and then up in Morgan County, which was really detailed. But go through and think about those existing collaborations and networks that are happening and think through how or where they might be referred. And I do think a lot of you have collaborative management programs. In the very beginning of this intervention, actually, we were all asked to create an MOU or an agreement, not only with the RIE provider, but also with our collaborative management program, because we knew that that was also where a lot of those folks that were looking at cross-system involved youth or youth that were involved with multiple systems. And so we have those plans. So as you start thinking of getting ready to launch this, that's a super great way to start thinking about where referrals come from, because it is really finding those young people that we're really bringing back in to really get these supports so that we don't find them in the adult system, homeless, who could have been Chafee eligible or could have gotten this resource. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to, let's see here. I think we're going to learn a little bit about the coach-like engagement. So Christy, are you going to start kicking us off for that conversation?
And next slide.
Yeah.
Denise.
So yeah, I think I was just going to kind of talk about this slide and then I'll pass it along to Jeff. I mean, you guys can kind of read through these and see what the core components of the intervention are. We talked a bit about it in the beginning as well. We're going to kind of go through some of these, but engaging youth in a coach-like way, crisis stabilization, is huge. Then establishing goals, securing and maintain a safe and stable housing, case planning and assessment tools, the flex funds, that's the small scale financial systems. We've just kind of gone over referrals and talked a lot about that. And then we will also talk about advocacy and permanency, and then identifying community connections. So I think we're gonna throw it off to Jeff next, who's gonna talk about engaging youth in a coach-like way.
Thank you, Christy, and good afternoon, everybody. Well, as you've heard, coaching is the intervention as it relates to the Pathways demonstration program. And the coaching model our approach is based on is coactive, which is often referred to as CTI. CTI has been around for about 25 years and is the one internationally recognized coaching certification. I just placed a link in the chat box that will take you directly to the coactive site. And coactive is a model that builds upon a fundamental nature that coaching is a relationship, that the coach and coachee are collaborators. Their relationship is an alliance between two equals and the purpose of meeting the coachee's needs. So before I dive into the required training and cohort scheduling and purpose, there's a few things I have to highlight. Next slide, please. So here you will see the 4 cornerstones of coaching and the 5 contexts of coaching related to the coactive model. So the 4 cornerstones of coaching based on this model, the first one is the principle of people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. You'll see that in the upper left-hand side. And what this means is people are capable. People are capable of learning, identifying goals, taking action, finding answers, and recovering, the bouncing back when things don't go as planned. So think of this, the alternative to this thinking is that people are fragile and dependent and need others to solve their problems. And I ask you to think about your own learning. How have the successes and those recovery moments influenced who you are? The second cornerstone is based on the principle of focus on the whole person, bottom right-hand side. And oftentimes in our work, we take an approach of what is a problem to be solved? Well, this thought or question may come from the best of intentions. Think about it. When you're sitting across from a person, that person does have a problem to solve, a task to accomplish, but you're still sitting across from a person. And that person is more than a problem. That person is more than a challenge. That person also has their hopes and dreams. And this is why we need to focus on the whole person. You know, the heart, the mind, the body, the spirit, because as we know, that's all intertwined. The third cornerstone is based on the principle of dancing in the moment. We know that conversation is powerful and that the words we use are powerful. The mood, the environment, the questions, how we listen, the follow-up questions we provide, being clear on what the topic is, and the details that are being shared or not shared. Being in the moment means you're not having an agenda and you're not necessarily focused on the past. This dance builds upon the co, as we refer to coactive. Co is the 2 people who are coach and coachee. It's having trust and a flow. It's moving together when shifts as to who's leading and who's following. And I really have to place a huge emphasis on the 2 people involved in the at the moment. It's the process of where the coach recognizing where the coachee is. And whatever you want to call them, it is a relationship, but are these sessions? Are these meetings? And you want to ensure that there's a natural flow. The fourth cornerstone is based on the principle of evoking transformation. While topics to these sessions may be very topic specific, the dance and exploration and how these topics connect with the whole person really lead to a deeper connection to the topic, to the questions, to the responses, and really identifying where action needs to take place. You know, we heard Will speak about the process, and while there's a goal identified, we need to break it down into smaller steps, that process. Oftentimes we hear our students speak about, hey, when I graduate college. Well, in the meantime, step 1 might be exploring the program of interest. Step 2 may be applying to those programs. There's several steps before you graduate, but really learning from a deeper awareness of where action needs to be taken, where action was taken, what worked, and identifying those barriers. Now, I really want to highlight that the Pathways approach places much emphasis on the process of coaching. I'm going to really emphasize the word process because this is a process that really emphasizes skills in regards to engagement and our having opportunities to practice those skills through experience and observation. And in reality, I speculate and believe that many of you are already incorporating some of these principles and skills in the work you do with youth. The next thing I want to highlight is the 5 contexts of coaching based on the coactive model. 1, You will see listening right up top. But there is a skill to listening, and we know that there's various levels. We need to listen at a deeper level as to what's being said. What is a theme? How does what's being said connect to the whole person? It's also recognizing when the saboteur shows up, and hearing where maybe the coachee is being their own worst enemy, when pessimism lays in. The second context is intuition. And it's really leaning into identifying what is a value in what is being said and what's not being said. It's leaning into your intuition and exploring what's standing in the way of forward movement. And curiosity. To me, this is really super powerful. And this really drives the questions we ask as coaches. It's exploring the details. It's identifying what a challenge is, identifying what next steps may be. To me, I really like to refer to this as childhood wonderment. Just think of when you're engaged in conversation and people ask you follow-up questions. It's that curiosity that hopefully inspires you to respond with some enthusiasm. But a lot of it really depends on you recognize when they've been listening to what's been said and the follow-up questions that are asked. The fourth context is forward and deepen. So this is focused on where are you going? What are the next steps? Recognizing what your comfort zones are and then stretching them. The fifth context is self-management. And this is where we really need to hold back judgment as to what's right or wrong. It's not our providing solutions as a coach. It's our being in the moment. And this may be uncomfortable. But as skills are being developed by the coach, this is where we really need to manage how we ask those questions, how we listen, and we're not giving advice. Mark mentioned it and highlighted it so gracefully earlier. It's not our telling them what the right thing to do is. I wrote that down, Mark, and I just wanted to make sure I captured that correctly. So what I really want to highlight is we're not saying that any of the approaches you may be doing are wrong. What I really want you to hear is continue doing that. And with this process, it's adding to your skill set. It's adding to, not only by adding to the other skills you possess, but it's having the ability to process within a process and having a positive influence on youth and yourselves as professionals. So this process truly builds upon those 4 cornerstones and 5 contexts of coaching, making up that process. A process that includes a variety of tools on establishing a topic that's going to be addressed, tools in deepening the learning for not only yourself as a coach, but asking the questions which really deepen the learning for the coachee in recognizing why he or she has identified a goal, in identifying where he or she is making progress and taking action, and also identifying where there might be some resistance, whether it's spoken or not. Again, those saboteurs, and recognizing why the coachee is not taking action, even though they keep identifying something as a goal. So this leads me to what we have to offer. Next slide, please. So as both a requirement of pathways and continued learning opportunities, navigators complete an engaging youth in a coach-like way training. Currently, we've had to adapt this multiple times, and most recently with our social distancing and working remotely, it is a 12-hour virtual training. I trust that we'll revisit this. The second piece is Pathways navigators and supervisors are part of cohorts that meet on a monthly basis to experience coaching as a coach, as a coachee, and as an observer. So a lot of our work and we refer to it as process coaching, but it's taking different perspectives. So within our monthly coaching calls, we also have a debrief following the session. And in that debrief, we really do a deep dive on the various skills that were presented. And the third thing we've historically offered is triannual workshops. And this is where we really do a deep dive into all the various skills, more opportunities to practice. We haven't had these within the last year, obviously, again, due to COVID, but we will revisit. And when they were occurring, they really proved to be really good learning experiences. So what I want to highlight here is it's also one thing to attend a training on coaching, but it's also something else to experience the learning just through your experience, through your personal experience, through observing others. And foundational to all of this is relationship, vulnerability, trust. We heard our navigators speak about the amount of time they spend in the engagement phase. You know, it takes time to develop that vulnerability, to develop trust. And it goes back to the co-piece of coactive and CTI coaching. It's a we thing. And we can't be so naive or expect, hey, great, you've been matched, now be completely vulnerable. That takes time. So a goal of our cohort work is to create space to learn through experience. It's to create space and practice of various skills that are part of this process. It starts with the Designed Alliance, developing an agreement as to how the group will work together, identifying values and goals for how we'll spend our time together. It's knowing that the Designed Alliance and agreements can change over time. What you need day one is going to be very different than you need a month later, 3 months later, or a year later. And that relationship's going to evolve, as will the needs. Our monthly coaching calls are scheduled in a manner that allows for each person to experience each of these roles. A member of each group develops a rotation. So each month, those in these roles will change. And these monthly meetings really create an opportunity to be in the space of those 4 cornerstones and the 5 contexts based on the coactive model. And to experience this process, we really need to spend time together. The process really highlights, it's kind of a bell curve, where you spend 10% of the time getting clear on a topic, 80% of the session in deepening that learning, and then 10% of the time in presenting a challenge and what are next steps with the accountability. Now, ideally, part of that process includes, as I just explained, that last 10% is presenting a challenge and accountability. Let's fast forward a week. Now, whatever that challenge and accountability is, that is a foundation of your next meeting. That is where you start. That is where you explore what action was taken. Is this still a goal? How inspired are you to continue moving forth towards this? And if there was no action taken, what is a barrier? What was a barrier? And if there's a barrier week after week on that goal, then that leads to another area that you need to just explore a little deeper. So lastly, what I've shared about the training and support, I realize is not enough. I highlighted that we have a monthly coaching calls. And like anything, anytime we develop a skill set, the only way we enhance that skill set is through practice. And I realize that a monthly coaching call is not enough, but I dare not attempt to schedule on a weekly or even daily basis. But I encourage all of you who are involved and those that are going to get involved, identify different opportunities to practice. So it is a process. And we really need to be intentional in scheduling time with one another, whether it's incorporating into supervision, in team meetings, or finding time with a fellow navigator or anyone else trying to develop these skills. Bottom line is we need to create opportunities to continue to practice and try out our questions and other skills. Thank you for your time and your continued interest in Pathways. Looking forward to working with you all.
Thanks so much, Jeff. That was wonderful and so important because all the work that we're doing here is grounded in coach-like engagement. And so now we're going to go back to the navigators, turn it back over to Christy, Will, and Mark to kind of talk about those core components that we reviewed early on, starting with crisis stabilization. Christy, Will, and Mark, you guys want to jump in here?
I'll go. I think that we kind of all do this work, and this kind of has to be acknowledged, before we can kind of move forward, that there is some element of crisis stabilization that has to be done with some of these youth that we work with. So I think we just kind of didn't want to gloss over that this is a big part of the program too, because we need to be able to have that to be able to work with these youth. Will?
Yeah, for me, it's a huge part, especially the rural communities that I'm in. There's no homeless shelter for them to go. They typically don't have family in the area. So it's part of the crisis stabilization for me, anyways, the way I think about it, and the way I'm pretty sure Christy and Mark chime in on this, but for me, it's taking them out of that element, getting them somewhere where they feel safe, and maybe getting them a meal or something. So it's one less thing for them to have to, okay, where's my next meal coming from? I don't technically feel safe right now, so they can breathe. Taking those things off of their mind so they can breathe for a minute and think about, okay, what next steps do we need to do to get me back into a safe state of mind and a safe place in life. So, safety, food, and mental health all wrapped into one is something that can be profound to see, especially even if it's just over a meal. They're like, okay, I got food. Okay, let's think about this. Break it down. Now I can breathe for a little bit. It's one less thing on my mind. So it takes them out of that crisis for a moment, even if it's just for a moment, so they can think, okay, here's where I'm at. Here's where we need to go.
Yeah. Also, I think in this, when they're in this crisis, that's one of the most important times to talk about their support system, to identify who they have in their lives as far as friends and family and professionals who they can turn to at that time. And Will touched on the mental health component, which is huge. And I think, when they're in that crisis situation, that's the time we really need to be doing mental health intakes and getting them hooked up with services. If you're homeless and if you're hungry, you're not going to be able to work on goals. That's all you're going to be able to think about is where you're going to sleep, where your next meal is going to come from. So, yeah.
So I think next we kind of are going to talk about establishing goals. And I know that Will and myself and Mark have kind of talked a little bit about this already. You guys know that they are, youth driven, and they really, we kind of try and tie it into one of those 5 outcome areas. And they are free to add or take off goals throughout our time working together. Additional goals can be developed, but we really try and focus on 2 at a time. I think any more than that is, it's just too much. Taking on those 2 can be a lot already. So I would say once you get one goal done, then you can add another. So Mark or Will?
yeah, no, you hit it right on the head, and we've talked about it a little bit here and there, but the goals that they set are their own. Like Christy was saying, it's their own goals that they think that are important to them or that they want to move forward with.
Yeah, and it's important to remember too that those goals could change. Um, they're not set in stone, and it's their goals. So maybe you start working on it and you think you're making really good progress, and all of a sudden that's no longer the youth's goal, and they're going to change it. And it's important to roll with those punches, no matter what you think. You're there to guide them and to coach them, and just follow their lead.
Now moving into housing, because, we've got our 5 key outcome areas. Housing obviously is critical. And we wanted to spend a little bit of time. I think Heather, if you want to talk, or Kippy, or both of you want to talk a little bit about your perspectives with housing and some innovative things that we've done to address safe and stable housing for youth enrolled in Pathways.
Heather, do you want to start and then I can follow up?
Sure. I mean, housing, isn't that like the golden ticket of everything for our youth that they need right now and getting them housed? I will say, like, we have been able to utilize the Pathways vouchers that were available at the time. Currently, our county is also pursuing the Foster Youth Initiative vouchers to have additional ones, but vouchers, I will say, is not the end all be all, because you're like, oh, yay, we have this golden ticket, but finding somewhere to cash the ticket is equally as challenging. And so I often say we can get our kids housed, we can't keep them housed. And that is also because of mental health component. I think that also needs to be addressed with our youth. And so I will say, while it is specific to housing and how we're engaging the youth and what questions we're asking and trying to get them in different situations, that we have to be cognizant of, what they're bringing to the table and what they're able to do, and what those barriers and stuff looks like. Like I said, we have been able to get some kids on different kind of vouchers through the coordinated entry system. And so, that has come with its own set of challenges with like rent issues and other things of the follow-up that is required on that. And so just, staying in touch with our young people and asking the questions and making sure that the professionals know that we're involved. So we're being invited to the table, because I think I've had quite a few times a youth ended up about to be evicted from a place, and we had no idea what was going on, and it could have been easily remedied like a few months back. But they were only talking to the youth, and of course sometimes youth contact changes, or they just didn't relay the information, or whatever the case may be. And so really making sure that we're all looped in and kind of working together as a team still with the youth once they're getting housed, not just to be all up in their business like that, but I just navigated a reason again with apartment complex. The rent for the youth had changed because they got a better paying job, and they waited like 4 months and assessed the 4-month rent increase all at once, but they did the new rental price times 4 as opposed to what the youth had been paying. So it was like $5,000 or something. And so, kind of hashing it out and staying aware of like some of these places that our kids can use the vouchers for. They take advantage of our young people. And so we got to really kind of be in there and talking with them. And not to say that's everywhere, but there is a lot of hands-on involvement that is goes with helping to keep our kids housed, and helping to teach them to know what questions to ask, and put me on that email with that person or whatever. And, you know, when you're teaching them how to do those things. And so I do think that the vouchers have been extremely helpful, but that's certainly only one component in getting them housed. We've also used like Open Up, which allows you to like rent a room in a house. They have several different kind of setups. And so that was extremely helpful for some of our youth that have some different backgrounds that may not be able to get into a lease situation, but they were able to get into there. And also just able to get a youth into an apartment, a studio apartment on their own by providing like a letter of intent to the leasing office so that they would waive them having to have a co-applicant. I think, you know, certainly some of those are just trying to think outside of the box and trying to get kids housed here just because a lot of different reasons with COVID and everything that's going on. It's been difficult. Sorry, I'm picking up something back. I don't know if it's me or not. Can you guys hear me? Sorry. Okay. So anyway, those were just some ideas on how you can kind of help get kids in different housing situations, also exploring their family issues or friend issues of things that we could help, you know, pay with deposit and, you know, all kinds of sometimes financial help to get them situated in a situation, but identifying who's in their circle where they're staying already, because I do think our young people are very resourceful. And at the same time, you know, they're done with like the system. And so a lot of times they don't like to ask us for help. And so I do think this is a unique opportunity to kind of help them in a different way that's actually helpful to them. And the other thing is I partner a lot with Urban Peak. So I meet with them monthly. And they kind of have on their radar who I have on my list, and they let me know some people that they have going on so that we can kind of cross help out some of our youth, and, you know, me knowing about other grants and stuff that are available that are not in the coordinated entry system. And so just trying to talk to whoever your community partners are. I'm always open if you guys wanted to reach out to myself of, you know, ideas, or if there's a kid in the Denver metro area that I could give. We reach out to our other counties. I know Adams have shared their list of like their FUP rental list when we're trying to get kids housed in other counties, but they're a Denver youth. And so teamwork makes the dream work. I think sharing all of our networks and connections is extremely helpful, and just not being afraid to reach out to people and say, hey, I got this kind of situation. You know, do you have anything or know of anything? That has been really helpful. I know Allison and Jessica have been really helpful with that as well.
And I'll just add that as you guys start looking at housing, this is why when this grant started, there were RIE providers who were part of this, really formal partners of this. I encourage every site, and I'm happy to help your county if you don't know who your RIE partner is or who would be who could help you with this. Because really your runaway and homeless youth provider, I mean, this is where they live and breathe. You know, we do a lot of work in that. And, you know, the goal of Pathways is really looking at those higher risk youth. And so when you think about housing, it's important to kind of get a lay of the land, as I call it, on the different types of housing resources and what's appropriate for what type young person. I mean, there is permanent supportive housing vouchers out there. We have state housing vouchers. We have tenant-based rental assistance. There is rapid rehousing dollars out there to help young people. Counties have home dollars. So, you know, I can go, the list can go on. And so really taking some time to learn. I think RIE providers down the road will be providing some help on really helping to understand those housing resources. but know that it starts with knowing what's out there and how to get in on. If you are not trained yet to do the coordinated entry process for young people, make sure you do get trained. I would encourage you to make sure you SPDAT, as they call it, every youth that you're working with to get them on that coordinated entry list. Each of you has your own COC, and I can get the dots of who you would talk to, but I would say make sure you coordinate entry youth. As Heather said, look at alternative ways. You know, we in the rural world, we use host homes a lot. I think that's very much what we're finding a lot of our young people. It's a room sharing strategy. Think of it as Airbnb for youth. We also see that we use a diversion model is really reality testing about housing choices a young person might have. It's a great coaching activity, and I'm happy to share that because you really want to reality check with the young people about their housing place. And then when we get up to after they get into housing, there's a whole lot that you can do about helping them be good tenants, and what does that mean, and helping them think through, you know, what are roommate agreements. And I have a sample of roommate agreements and other things. So anything housing you want me to know, I'll send you my link for all my resources. But we do have a ton of ways to really think about that broadly, because remember, this is from a youth's perspective, right? And so they're looking at what housing makes sense to them, and you're really helping to coach them into, you know, is this stable? Can I stay there? And then also from a navigator perspective, a lot of it is getting the documents ready. And there is nothing harder than working with a homeless youth who is going to remain homeless because we can't find housing, but it doesn't mean there's aren't things you're doing. And so it might be helping them get the documents, helping them get the paperwork filled out, helping them think through what are other housing options. So I would say this is something that takes a long time, but I will say that in doing it, the last piece to add is as you're planning is remember that housing support lasts well after the young person gets housed. So even though the young person might be stable, remember that there's still coaching activities and things to help them learn how to maintain that housing so that they can stay. And so coaching sessions may be a lot about just the things that make housing hard on all of us. And we did have young people move around and change vouchers. We had one young person that had a voucher forever, and he did not want it because the requirement of what that housing had to look like was not the type of housing he wanted. And you know, we had that happen. We had another young person that was talked out of a voucher because they kind of were so afraid about that. And our coach had been working almost for 3 months to get that young adult to agree to take that voucher, knowing that they had really high mental health needs and would probably be a youth that would need that type of support for a long time. So that is also why it's so important to kind of what I would say, align and stay with that young person through the safe and stable housing goal of this intervention, because it's complex for anyone, but it's especially complex, as Heather said. Our young people oftentimes find themselves in a situation that they didn't know was going to happen, or they get too far away ahead on rent. That's where flex funds will come in, and you'll hear about those. But you know, our job is to keep them housed and really help to work with them about how to maintain that. So really think about getting them housed and then making sure that there's enough time so that that housing becomes a home to them and they can stay longer. And I know Heather, I know Nicole has been involved in some tenant meetings for when they're doing the coordinated entry, the by name list. So if you're not part of those coordinated entry meetings where the by name list is being reviewed, sometimes those are great to go to, because your young person may be told they don't qualify or they're not high at the list. You can actually go to the meeting and advocate for your young person and help them understand why they should be on that list. So that's the housing stuff. And then I think we'll bounce this off. Is this the supervisors that are going to talk a little bit about flex funds?
Yes. And then I think if we can have the supervisors talk about the distribution of flex funds, the importance of that, and kind of the mechanics of kind of in a governmental agency, how are we able to provide flex funds directly to youth in a timely manner? And then we'll have the navigators very quickly give some examples. Nicole, do you want to share how flex funds are distributed in Boulder?
excuse me. So our navigators have purchase cards. So that makes it quite a bit easier, as long as something can be purchased through, our accounting credit card, then that is one way. There is also the ability to write a check directly. Well, we request a check and then accounting writes a check to either a vendor or service provider of some sort. And we've actually gotten that to be a much faster process as well. Vendors can pick up or have direct deposit. But prior to that, having a check cut through the county could take quite a bit of time, which is why we really do prefer to make payments through the P card program.
Heather, do you want to share how Denver does?
We don't do it like that. No. That's why I was like, oh, I learned something new, Nicole. Usually like our flex funds, it's no different than, how when we do Chafee funds, like if a kid that talked to me, they have a request for something, then, I make the request. We have, finally got e-gift cards that we could do now. So we're doing that. Certainly before when we had first started, all of the Chafee workers have P cards, so they were able to put stuff on their P card, or they can get reimbursed for youth and funding. But usually the Mark would just meet with the youth and they would identify what it is that they would need, and then our process is a little technical of whatever forms is used. I know a while back, Kippy had shared, they had these asset forms that they use that I liked, that kind of help with the youth, kind of in justifying the needs a little bit, because that is a part that is important to me, to make sure that we're also just not throwing money at the problem, but teaching the youth about, money and kind of how they got there, and okay, we're help you with the situation, so how can we not get here again? And I do think that form is helpful to kind of put it on paper and give a visual with the youth. But we utilize, whatever also community resources of what other things can you use or tap into within your community to get your need met, so that, certainly when we're not around, they know where they can go to the Metro Care Ring to get food or whatever they need there as well. And so, also we've had to do rental assistance a few times in helping youth get caught up on those things. And so that's really just the navigator will let me know, and we kind of talk about it, and then I have a check cut to the landlord. But I always ask for the ledger and stuff, the company documentation for that for them and stuff as well. Thank you, Kippy. I think that would be helpful. I find that those forms to be helpful.
I'll get it out.
And Christy or Will or Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about just give a few examples of what flex funds, what you've provided in flex funding, what that looks like, and then we'll transition into the next slide of referrals.
Yeah. Pretty much anything and everything you could think of, I've used flex funds for. Vital doc fees, if we can't get vouchers to pay for those, clothes, food, gas cards, like I mentioned earlier, phones or phone cards for their plan, things like that. Yeah, tires, oil changes, all kinds of things. You name it, I've probably paid for it.
And this is Christy. I would agree with Will. I mean, just to try and think back over my 5 years of the things I've used flex funds, it's been there's been a very large variety of things. And I think for me, the most beneficial piece is that piece of being able to meet them at Starbucks, or wherever, and buy them a coffee and let's go sit down and chat, like let's go chat. And just being able to purchase them that coffee up front, it's like we're both sharing a drink together, and relaxes everyone a little bit. So I think those are like the smallest funds that I use, and I can go for, to much bigger things like beds and kind of some of the other stuff Will talked about as well. But I think for me, it's just being able to have that card and immediately be able to purchase them something is the most beneficial thing.
Yeah, I would say on my caseload, the largest use has been for rental assistance to avoid eviction. Groceries, food is always a huge one. But we've had some moms expecting newborns, so we've done a lot with baby items. Furniture for youth is a big one when they do get housing, and we've done some hotel stays too, as interim housing.
I know we've talked a lot about referrals already, so we can kind of, Mark, if you want to share a little bit here about referrals, and the next slide, permanency, and then we'll try to move us through here so we get through everything.
Yeah, I think Will and Christy probably have more knowledge of the referrals than I do, but just community referrals is the biggest one. And of course, housing is always the largest one. So like KP was saying, making sure that that every youth that comes in has had the VSPADAT done to make sure they're in the one home coordinated entry list. But community referrals, as far as making sure they know where food banks are, homeless shelters if they need to utilize that, vital docs, what agencies provide those, how to get them for free if they don't have funding to do that. Christy, Will, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, community referrals, community partners, agency referrals. Parents have done a couple referrals, and obviously self-referral if they hear from our program and they really like what they hear and they really want to be into it, so they refer themselves.
Yeah, I would add just that, how super important it is to do those direct referrals and warm handoffs. I think it's, super important for the person who sent me the referral. It's oftentimes I'll meet with maybe the runaway and homeless youth provider at the shelter with the person who gave the referral, so that it is a really warm handoff for that youth, so that they know that we're working together. So that's all I would add.
And then moving into permanency.
Yeah, in working together, it's a great transition. Ensuring that, permanency, ensuring that they have at least one supportive adult they can turn to for help if they need, be it a teacher, a coworker, anything of that nature. Even if it's a caseworker that no longer works with them anymore, they're like, I really like that caseworker, they were really cool. We get them connected, and it helps develop their permanency in the long run.
And then moving into kind of transitioning towards graduation. You guys want to talk a little bit about that?
I just want to kind of add here too, as we're making these warm handoffs and referrals, oftentimes I'm meeting with the youth maybe less frequently during this time. Maybe we go down to every other week, so that they can build those natural connections with those supports that they are hopefully building in their lives.
Next slide, Denise. So Christy, do you want to start with the graduation criteria? Also be aware of the time.
Sure, I'll go.
This is important. This is kind of our last important thing we need to hit on.
I do think this is super important, because when we first started this pathways journey and kind of figuring out what this was all going to look like, we didn't have a graduation criteria. And I think we kind of started noticing that we were having some youth that were maybe kind of hanging on a little too long, or, you know, I think we've kind of found that people could always be in need of things. And so we started kind of figuring out, all right, what does this look like to end pathways and to graduate and to move forward from this program? Because again, it's not supposed to be a long-term program. It's more of a kind of shorter term intervention instead of a much longer term intervention. So I think the graduation criteria came about because we needed some way to figure out, what does this look like for a youth to graduate from the program? So we came up with this. Well, this was also supervisors, navigators, youth led. We all kind of gave feedback into this graduation criteria and what this looks like. And so we came up with these 5 basic things that we feel like need to be kind of met for a youth to be able to graduate from pathways. So not in crisis, obviously, their basic needs are met, that they have some stable housing. And this could, you know, we've kind of learned, I think, through doing pathways, this isn't always, you know, maybe set up in their own 1-bedroom apartment. It could look as a different form of housing, but it's definitely not at a homeless shelter or any kind of shelter-like environment or anything that's temporary. We want this to be someplace that we know that youth is going to be and have some stability. And as we talked about earlier, the supportive adult connection, we kind of have found that that's really important in youth succeeding, is having that supportive adult. And then we kind of have a couple of the other ones that are completing the assessments, the baseline survey, and the other assessments as well. And then that 2 goals were achieved in that time period. Whatever those 2 goals that you guys had created with them, that those were met. Next slide. So I think, and then Will or Mark, don't feel free to jump in too. You know, I think we kind of, we're kind of trying to link some of these goals as well to the coaching outcomes. So things like goal setting and resiliency and self-efficacy are also part of the graduation criteria. And I know everyone was sent out their graduation criteria. So if you have it, feel free to bring it up on your screen and look at it, because I think you'll kind of see a little bit more what this is talked about. But they can determine, well, the youth has the ability to make and set their own goals. The youth has increased confidence overall. There we go, thank you. And the ability to be assertive and self-advocate. So those were added on there to be kind of coaching criteria. And you can see that it says that youth has met a minimum of 5 out of the 8 criteria below. They need to be in stable housing, not in crisis, and at least have a supportive adult connection. Those need to be always met. So I think that's, Will or Mark, do you guys have anything to add? I know for me, it was super helpful to add the graduation criteria and bring it to supervision with my boss and be able to look at it and really kind of talk about what does this look like for this youth to move on. So you guys want to add?
No, it was a great thing to learn when I first came onto Pathways. So we do have an end goal above all and a way to look at it. So, and you do great, Christy. I didn't want to jump in and ruin your flow.
I think one point to make that kind of struck us later in phase 2 or midway through phase 2 is that, we need graduation criteria. And then, you know, there was a cohort of youth who we hadn't really kind of set that expectation up front with. And so that became somewhat uncomfortable, but we learned that, you know, right up front, when you're building that relationship with the youth, it's important to note that this is, you know, a time limited intervention, and we're not putting a specific time on it, but we want to set some goals and work with you to achieve those goals and get you to a good place so we can kind of transition out of those weekly meetings, and the navigator can then serve other youth or serve more youth. So I think having that conversation up front was something, you know, that we learned that was of critical importance to this process. And I think just to wrap us up, Nicole, do you want to provide us with kind of your perspective as a Boulder County supervisor on what this, you know, Pathways intervention has felt like to you in Boulder, if Nicole is still with us?
I am.
Okay.
And I am just looking at this slide and thinking, oh, I don't recall exactly, but I was thinking that it's really important to start with the end in mind. So when you were just talking about, start talking about this from the beginning, so that it doesn't take youth by surprise. And I know that there have been some youth that were thinking, you know, they don't want to close. They have actually said no to graduating. So, you know, certainly thinking about how to facilitate that smooth transition and really celebrating all that the youth has accomplished and that that's what it is about to graduate. And as far as the experience in Boulder, I think that it's been such an overall positive experience. I mean, there was definitely some bumpy beginnings, but that's been, so many years ago now. And so it's been so positive, and I think it's really exciting to be a part of the research process so that we have a real firm evidence-based practice that we can utilize across the state. And it, you know, I think some of the worry in saying that has been that it's going to be a rigid expectation, that there is still flexibility within the model rollout. It is just that there is a more structured way to deliver service for youth. And I think that's something we've been wanting for so long. I know I've been involved in Chafee, I don't know, about 12 or 14 years at this point. And it started out as a question, I think, for so many coordinators that come on board, you know, like, oh, what's the manual, what's the process? And I think this is going to be the answer to those questions. And I think it's just very exciting.
Thank you, Nicole. Next slide. So just a few reminders to wrap up here, and we'll have a few minutes for questions. I will stay on. I can stay on past 1 o'clock if there's anyone that wants to stay on and has some burning questions they want answered now. But just a reminder, if you have staff turnover, which we know that happens, it's already happened, just please let us know so we can get those trainings scheduled for the coach-like engagement of new staff. I want to note that it's critical to make sure that the youth contact information is updated constantly. You know, anytime a phone number, an email address, or even a mailing address changes, please make sure that you're updating that information. You know, the evaluation team, project management team is here to support you. Please reach out. We appreciate that you're on this road with us, and we're here to support you through this, you know, the next few years of the evaluation and this transition to coach-like engagement, you know, Pathways services. And just a reminder, the evaluation is only as good as the data that you collect. Our next trainings are scheduled for May 11th or May 17th. You only need to register for one, but we're going to spend some time training you on that data collection. So the PMIS, Pathways Management Information System training, and data collection evaluation training is scheduled for May 11th or May 17th. Just register for one. You should have that email registration link sent to you. If you don't, please let us know and we'll get it to you. And I believe, feel free to unmute yourself if you have any additional questions, or my team, if I forgot to mention anything, please let me know. Heather, yes, you will continue documenting in Trails as always, and you know, that's not going to change. We are making some significant adjustments to the PMIS system. So PMIS is kind of In phase 2, we had a very robust system where there was a lot of information that was collected for the evaluation. We still have information that's being collected for the evaluation, but we have made significant edits to the system. So it'll be less burdensome, less duplicative data entry. And so we're going to train everyone on that data entry. We've got the screening tool will be entered in there, and then it'll still be utilized as a case management system to document your interactions with the youth, set those goals, since there's no place in Trails for that. But the WAI, you might have seen that acronym on here, the Working Alliance Inventory, is the only tool that the navigators will need to complete, and the youth as far as a survey. Then in June, once we get a little bit closer to study enrollment, we will have Mathematica actually is going to hold a training that you can choose to attend. Again, just one, but we're going to hold about 4 of them. I think that you can find a time that fits for your schedule to register and learn about that actual enrollment process, because as you may have heard, we're going to mail out some cell phones to all the navigators, and you're, when at enrollment, going to be able to hand that phone to the youth if you're in person, and they can complete the baseline survey on their own at that point in time. So baseline survey will still need to be completed. There's that informed consent process for study enrollment, and that will be a June training with our Mathematica team. So Kimberly asked about the registering for the PMIS training. We sent out the link to register for the May 11th or May 17th training. And following this meeting, you will get a unique email sent to you. The email that we have from all of you will be your login for the PMIS. So we're going to send you out instructions on getting logged in, and would encourage you to log in to PMIS prior to that training. And we'll just walk through all of that with you. It's don't be too nervous. I know learning a new system seems probably overwhelming because you're learning a lot, but we've had a lot of good feedback from our navigators. It's very intuitive. There's not, a lot of information in there for you to enter. It's really kind of notes for you all to kind of keep track of the work you're doing with the navigators. And there's not many fields in there that'll be required entry. But yes, you will learn this new system. But again, it's a much edited version based on what we've done before. Any other questions? We've got 1 minute left. So if there's any burning questions, you can unmute yourself and ask it. I can stay on for a few minutes past the hour if needed. Otherwise, I want to thank you all so much for attending today and for being on this journey with us. We appreciate your participation and your engagement. And we're here if you have any follow-up or lingering questions that you need answered. Otherwise, we'll see you on May 11th or 17th. Thanks, everybody.